Hello students of NDSU LA 232 and anyone else, as always, who watches my videos. Here's what I showed in class today, and I threw a lot of things at you, so what I want to do now is give you kind of the same lecture in YouTube format, so you can pause and play and rewatch at your leisure. Let's get started. You will need to start with a somewhat reasonably thought out CAD file, and usually it will need to be cleaned up. This is all publicly available data that I cleaned up, aggregated, renamed, so you can see I've got a background image, a couple of vegetation layers, a site boundary that happens to be 750 feet, I believe, and I can further audit this visually by changing my view. I like to always look at contour data from the side to make sure nothing is too out of the ordinary. And if I click on a contour, I can see that it is in 909 because that is the layer it is assigned to. There are other ways. Usually there will be annotation showing you how these are situated in elevation. Let me go back to a top view and I'll zoom extents. These vegetation blocks are all, and here's a good example. Every now and then things will look jaggedy, more jaggedy than they actually are. If you ever see that, just type for regen and hit enter, and your model will regenerate. That's just Autocad being efficient in how it displays things to you. But notice these vegetation blocks are all the exact same size and the exact same orientation, and they're quite large. I'm going to say that they're drawn in at a mature size because you can see the trees they visually sit on top of are smaller. But this is a common convention, especially if this were to be a planting plan or a construction document. They don't need to be all randomized and rotated. That works well when it's presentational in its purpose, but maybe that's not the case. I'll show you a way to fix that when we get to SketchUp. But anyway, this is what it is. I can just save this as a 2013 version or whatever the most current version is. Keep in mind, when you go to SketchUp, you usually need to save back a year or two for SketchUp to be able to see that version. Otherwise, you might get an error message telling you the file type is incorrect. So here I am in SketchUp, and I'm going to do a file import, and I'll navigate to that same folder. Now, if you are a student of mine, you have access to these files from the class Blackboard, which looks like this and is located here in class exercise files, 2010 version. Go ahead and click and download that. If you're not a student of mine, you should be able to still follow along, and hopefully this will make sense. Now, I've got a 2010 version. I'm using SketchUp 2014, so I can import a 2013 version. At least I'm going to try. There we go. Let's hit OK. Let's zoom out by scrolling. Here's kind of a fun SketchUp thing. Sometimes, if your model is really large, and notice where my cursor is at, it's just over a white space. If you zoom out by scrolling, sometimes nothing happens because there's an infinite number of points that I'm scrolling out from, and SketchUp is just guessing incorrectly. But if you move your cursor on top of something like that tree, now I can orbit and zoom a little bit more reasonably. Always a good idea to, once again, audit your digital file. Let me load up my toolbars. They're sitting over on another screen, and I'll grab the tape measure, and I'm going to measure from here to here, and I can see that that is 650 feet. You know, I didn't do that in Parallels or in AutoCAD, so let's go over here. The command for measuring in AutoCAD is DI for distance, and let's just verify, and it is 650. It was there for a second and then it went away. There we go, 650. All right, back in SketchUp. What are some things we can do to start modeling this? Well, you'll notice the image did not come along for the ride. It just does not, because in AutoCAD it's linked, and SketchUp is just not smart enough to retain that link. It's just not built that way. It's a different file. I shouldn't say smart enough because it's just a different file type. But I'm going to import, because I kept these files really close to one another, which is always good file management, and I'm going to import as an image. That's really important. Don't do new matched photo or texture on this step. And I'll click on that 650 feet.tiff, which is the image that is linked inside of that DWG. And because the file was very clean, I know all I need to do is snap that to the corners of the site. And if I change my view or my camera to parallel projection, and I'll go to a top-down view, I can see that those all conveniently line up very much like the Autocad file. So another thing I'm going to do while I'm here is turn off my profiles, because that makes this just a little bit easier to see. All right, well, let me see. Let's grab that image. Whenever you import an image, it kind of has its own little weird container. It's not quite a group, so I can't double click on it to edit it. I can move it though, and very important, this is just a really conventional thing to be doing in SketchUp if you are doing any kind of landscape plan design. Keep things in the blue axes. So notice I'm staying in the blue axes as I move this. I can hit my up or down arrow key and it will lock it, so that's nice. All that's really important is that these stay vertically aligned. So once again, if I go to a top-down view, I can see that they are. All right, now I want to explode this image. Right-click, explode, and I can click on that image texture to see that it is in fact exploded. And I'm going to double-click and then right-click, make it a group. Well, why did you do that, Matt? Well, the reason is because now it's not in that weird image container. It is in a group that I can edit, and it is somewhat isolated from other geometry, so I don't need to worry about other shapes such as this intersecting or cutting that. So let's get rid of that. Okay, let's take a look at these trees down here. I'll talk a moment about managing components in SketchUp models. Now, if you were to imagine that this was a more sophisticated planting plan and you needed to very carefully select these, that makes this next demonstration make more sense. But I'm going to show you, one way obviously is just to draw a big box around them, and that would be pretty easy. The other way is to hold down Shift as you carefully click on these. So if this were more sophisticated, this might be what you think you need to do in order to select your trees. But I'm going to click over here. You don't need to do that. You can open up your component browser, which looks like this. And whenever you see the little house icon, you'll see it for different browsers in SketchUp and dialogues. That just means in model. So if you click on that, I'm seeing the components that are in my model, and it happens to be these two that were named in Autocad. They're no longer blocks. They are all purely SketchUp. So keep in mind, it's really a one-way street. You don't want to go back and forth. But now that I'm here, I can right-click and select instances, and that conveniently selects the instances. All right, here's something I see people do. If your vegetation is in a group, you cannot do that. So I'm going to select those and make that a group. So those are isolated. They're inside of this group. If I go back to my component browser, I no longer have these select instances. So if you ever think that you should see that and you are not, one of a couple things are happening. Either it's in a group and you just can't do it. So I'm going to explode that, or I could edit the group and I'll deselect. Now I can select instances. Here's the other situation. If it's already selected, you won't see it. So that's the other thing. The third time you might not see it is if they don't exist. So I'm going to go ahead and delete those. Whoops. Select instances, delete. All right. Now they are no longer in my model. Oh, sometimes it actually deleted it from here. I was not expecting that. So let's undo. Occasionally, they won't be in your model, but they will still be in your component browser. So that's the third situation. You will occasionally not see select instances. Anyway, now that I've got them, I can select them. And I'm going to apply a really cool plugin that I recommend all landscape architects and landscape architects in training get. It's the Chris Fullmer Rotate Multiple. Scale and rotate multiple. Where do you get this? You get it from the extension warehouse, which is either this icon here, or it lives under Window and Extension Warehouse. All you need is a Google account to log into this. And let's do CLF rotate. I think that's words that are in the name of this extension. Shape Bender, that is another good one. Anything with CLF by Chris Fullmer is very good. And where are you? There it is. Scale and rotate multiple. Click this and then you would click install. It's that easy. I've already got it installed, so I do not want to do this again. While I'm here, you know what? Let's search for simplify and possibly simplify contours. There we go. That's another one that doesn't hurt. It's a little buggy, but you know, it cleans up contour data that oftentimes, especially when it comes from Autocad, can be very heavy in terms of polygon. I've already cleaned this up in Autocad, so it's not too bad, but just know that it can get really messy. In situations like that, the Simplify Contour will help you out. Oh, let's see, what is another one? Is Drop on here? Probably not. Occasionally, you need to find an extension somewhere else. They're not always on the extension warehouse. Two other really good sources are the SketchUcation website. SketchUcation has a bunch of good plugins, and if you can spell, you will find yourself at this website. And if you dig around, there are some really cool tools. Here's a plugin store. Another really good one is Smustard.com. And Smustard has one called Drop, and it's free. There's a lot of here that cost money, but they are really good. Most of the plugins that you find at Smustard.com are really helpful. So I have included, you can either download it from there, or again, if you are a student of mine, this is included in the class Blackboard zipped packages right here, dropcg.rbz. If you ever see something ending in .rbz, you have to install it a little bit different manner. And here's what you do. SketchUp Preferences if you're on a Mac. If you're on a Windows, you have to go to Window and Preferences. Either way, once you are there, you will see this dialog, and you will want to go to Extensions and Install Extension. Select the .rbz and hit Open. And you'll see a couple of dialogues saying, hey, are you sure you want to do this? It's going to access your computer. That is okay. I think I've already got mine installed, but you know what? Let's do it again. All right. Once you've got those two steps done, everything should be good. Now, I think there's another plugin. You see there's Drop, Scale and Rotate, Simplify. I might think of another one as I go along here, but let's move along. Contours. There's a really good built-in tool called the Sandbox Tools. Again, on Windows, you have to click on Tool Palettes, but you'll want to be looking for Sandbox. Then you will see a dialog that looks like this one here, and they all do something different. For the sake of time, I'm only going to talk about this first one. From Contours, it does what it sounds like it would do. Now, you could select these and hit it, but where there are no contours over here, let's go ahead and try it. When you click on it, you'll see the dialog below. That little arrow, my little beach ball is going to race that arrow. And I should just stop it, but I'll let it complete because it's going to not model anything over here. So I will show you a fairly painless trick that I like to do so you can end up with a nice square shape of topography. And this is almost done. I'll play with the ball, bounce it around on here. There we go. So that's the shape that it created. Let me go to a top-down view. Notice it stops when it runs out of contours because SketchUp there's nothing else to connect to. So if you ever run into this situation, there's two things that I sometimes do. One is I'll create a shape like this, and then I'll just push-pull it, and then I'll intersect it with this component, leaving me that nice squared off part. So let me undo a couple times. Here's how I like to fix this. We just need to create a few helper geometries. And once again, I really want to pay attention to the blue axes. And I'll use the line tool I'll click once here to start, and notice I can see that rubber banding. If I'm really careful, I can keep it in the blue, or if I'm kind of lazy, I'll just hit my up arrow key, which I just did. Now it's staying in the blue direction no matter where I move my mouse. And I just clicked. I'm not clicking and dragging. That is important. And I'll just infer from this. So once you see that pop up, that's telling you that you are inferring from a geometry or constraining from a point. So when I see that, I will click. Now I'll just draw a little line. It doesn't matter how big it is. What does matter is that it's either in the green or red in this example. And then I will erase that helper line that got me there. So since the topography is changing from this contour to here, I know it's less than 1, because if it was more than 1, I would see another contour line. So what I'm going to do is select that, grab the move tool, and I'll move it up in the blue direction. Once it's started, I can just type 0.5 and hit enter. So that moves it up 0.5 feet. And I've got that corner covered. Now I'll do this corner. How about right here? Click. That one's really close to the blue axis, so you got to be careful. Arrow key on my keyboard to lock it, and I will infer. Now, since that one is pretty close, you know what? I'll just call it good. So I'll just draw a little helper line, and I will erase that. 2 more to go. I'll do these quicker. Lock, snap. Now I don't want to do the red one here because that is going outside of the bounds of my sight. I either want to go this direction or this one. Erase and get rid of that. And one more. So this trick works really well for the extents, the outer edges of your drawing. And it also works good for peaks and valleys. So this is a low point at the bottom of this basin. So I know that the contour just doesn't stop here. And if I run the from contour tools, that's how it will create the file. So what I want to do is I'll heal that surface just by connecting a little line. And I'm going to draw, you know what, a little triangle. That's fine. Now I'll erase this one, and that one, leaving me, well, I guess I have a surface here I got to get rid of. So let's click on that surface, delete. Now I've got myself another literal helper geometry, and I'll just move this one down. And I know, once again, it's not quite a foot, because if it was, I would see more contours. So I'll move it in the blue direction. I just need to get it started in that direction, and oh, how about 0.5? So now that is not as low as I was thinking. I wonder if my model is in inches. Oh, it is. Okay, that's a small problem. Not the end of the world, but I'm going to change my model units to feet. There we go. And I'm going to move that once again, 0.5. That looks like a foot, and I moved it 0.5 inches. You know what? I'm not even going to fix the edges because they're really not that important in terms of accuracy. You're not really going to get a grading plan caliber result from this. It's really more visual. But now that I've got those helper shapes and my little basin drawn, I will once again use the from contour tool. Pretty easy to select those contours. This is also nice when everything is separated. Sometimes you want to come in here and actually move things further apart, because at the end of the day, all that really matters is that these align when you look straight down. So let me go ahead and orbit. I've got those selected. Hit the contour from contour tool again. And once again, I will just wait as this moves along. And I should have prepared something else to talk about while this is moving. But the next thing we'll do, I can talk about how important the next step is. That sounds good. I'll show you how to project this image onto the topography that is about to be created, and there's a couple really important steps you will want to do. All right, that is done. If I turn on my hidden geometry, which I can't quite remember, there it is. You know, I can see how this was stitched together. This one wasn't too bad. Sometimes you'll see this drifting effect, like right up here, right down here. So it's not perfect. There are ways to clean it up so it doesn't do that, but that would be a topic for another video. But what I'm going to do is select this topography and move it in the blue direction. It creates its own component or group, which is nice. It's non-destructive. I like to keep my contours around, as you'll see here in a moment. And you know what? I'm even going to group those. Let me back up here because I need to be a little bit more careful. I'm going to move this down in the blue direction exactly 200 feet. Why exactly 200 feet? Because I'm going to want to move it back up here in a moment. Let me select those contours, right click and make group. All right, now I'll take this and move it back up 200 feet. All right, I'll come back to the contours here in a moment. How do we get this to project up here? Well, you might just think, oh, I'll take my paint bucket. I will sample it and I will apply it. And it looks horrible. Here is how you fix that. First of all, you don't do that. Verify that your image is in fact projected. Usually it is when you import it, as I did with this one. But I will double click. That will allow me to edit this group. Right click on that surface and hover over texture. Make sure it is set to projected, which mine is. That is good. While I'm in here, I'm going to sample it. I don't know if I need to be inside of the component in order to sample it, but it doesn't hurt. Let me go over here. If you're in Windows, this will look different, but I'm sampling by holding down Command. I think on Windows it's Alt. You will also have another tool on your color dialog that shows you that little eyedropper. But you should see something like this that is showing you that that texture is loaded up in your bucket, ready to be applied. All right. Select tool. As long as I don't do anything else with materials, that will stay in my bucket. Here's the trick. You need to edit that sandbox group that was created, and you do it just by double clicking. So double clicking, I am now editing this, and I can tell that because of this dashed line, and everything else is faded out. Depending on if you have hide rest of model turned on or off, yours might look like this. So view, component, edit, hide rest of model. Sometimes I like to have this turned on because it just isolates whatever you are working on. If I click out here, now I'm no longer editing and I can see the rest of model. Now everything is hidden. But you know what? I'm going to turn that back off. Grab my paint bucket tool. That texture is still loaded up, as I can see here. And because it is set to projected, it will align perfectly. There we go. Now I don't really need this image anymore, so I'll delete it. If I was really being smart, I'd actually probably hide it because you never know, I might need to come back and use it for something. Now these contours, they're a little bit dark. So what I'm going to do is load up my paint bucket again, and I'm going to paint it white, or maybe just slightly off white. Being very careful that I'm painting that edge of that contour. Well, it didn't change. Why is that? There is a setting underneath Styles, Window and Styles will bring up a dialog that looks like this. And I believe if you go to Edit, and there's different things you can edit, edges, surfaces, backgrounds, etc. The first box is Edge Setting, and I'm going to say Color by Material. Whoops. And what happened was I painted the edge of my topography. So once again, I moved them too close too soon. This time I got the contours. I'll move it 200 feet. And paint bucket. There we go. Now they are nice and not dark. Very careful to move it back exactly 200 feet. Ew, that's actually a bit too much. Actually looked better when it was dark. Well, you get the idea. You know what? Let's do this. Let's move it down again. And this time I'm going to paint it green. So now it'll be really subtle. And because I've told SketchUp to color the edges by the material, there we go. That looks kind of nice. It's, you know, I can zoom in here and you can still kind of see what's going on. If I didn't have my contours, if this just looked like that, it's really hard to kind of tell what's going on here, right? So with the contours on, I get a better sense of the topography and the lay of the land. All right, so that part is done. Let's go back and talk about these trees. You know what? I totally forgot about, I got on this track and I forgot, but Chris Fullmer's tools, once you've got the rotate and scale and rotate multiple, here's how it works. I've got my component browser. I will select those instances. Then I will go to plugins, Chris Fullmer tools, and scale and rotate multiple, and scale and rotate randomly. Well, how much should I make these change? It's really up to you. Deciduous trees, you know what? 80%, 0.8 and 1.2. Nothing will be smaller than 80% of its current size, and nothing will be larger than 1.2. The minimum and maximum rotations, I think you can do 360, but just to be safe, I'm going to say 359 because really they're the same number. Scale about axes. You need to know that your axis is in fact in the middle. If you are not sure, I would select center, but I know that these are because I made them, so I will say okay. And look what it did. It just randomly kind of rotated and did all that. Let's do the same thing with these evergreens. Select instances and plugins, scale and rotate multiple randomly. I'll do these a little bit less. I'll do 0.9 and 1.1. There, 360 worked. So evergreens probably not as much. When might you want to do uniformly? Well, maybe these are all just planted. Maybe these are mature as they are and you want to show them after 2 years. Well, I'll go back and I'll do the randomly or uniformly. I need to have something selected. Uniformly, and I'll just say, hey, make everything 0.8. And if I do that, everything is now just a little bit smaller. But I'm going to undo that because I want these to be drawn in at this size here. Okay, well, there's a few ways to swap these out with nicer looking trees. Just be careful. There's a lot of trees in the warehouse. A lot of them are too low polygon and they just generally look really bad. A lot of them are too large, you know, so you really got to be careful. There are some really good ones out there. LandFX recently did a competition and they had some pretty neat trees. So I'm going to do a search for LandFX tree download competition. Something like that should get me in the right internet neighborhood. There we go. Example trees. You can download these and read more about their really cool contest they did. There's also a video around here somewhere. Actually, that's kind of cool. LandFX webinar tree. You might find how to make trees in 3D worth watching. I would recommend it. Kind of cool. But let me go ahead and close that because that is the folder that I included with the downloads. And once again, it looks something like this one right here. Did I talk about how to install this one? Yes, I did. So SketchUp trees, there we go. These are those example trees from LandFX. A few ways to swap this out. One is to edit each tree. So I can edit this tree and I could draw a tree or anything. Doesn't really matter what I'm drawing, but whatever I draw in here gets shown and that scale and rotation is maintained. So maybe this isn't a tree landscape. Maybe it's this abstract installation instead. But let me undo that. That's just one way. So I could also import a tree. Let's do that. Let's go File, Import, and I need to say that I'm importing a SketchUp file. Oh, let's do, I like this Trident Maple. That one works pretty well. Let me get my crayons out of the way. Import. And I will snap this right to the center of that. So you can see these are very lightweight trees. Now what I could do is copy this, edit this tree, and paste in place. You know what? Let's do that. Let's do a edit, cut, edit my component, edit, paste in place. It puts it right back where it was, but now I'm in the component, so now it shows up everywhere. That's one way to do it. Let's undo. I want to show you some more ways. Another way is to go back to your component browser, and I can select this one here. Oh, and I see that the icon changed because of what I just did, but I should still be able to select instances. And I can replace these with anything. I can replace these with this car. There we go. Now I got cars. It's a crazy derby going on. Let me undo because I don't want to do that. Let's go back to In Model, right click, select instances. And here's that tree. Once you have imported it, and here's an example too. I don't actually have that one in my model anymore, but I can still see it. So that's a situation where earlier I said if it's blank or gray, that's one situation that might be the case. But because it's here, I can now select replace selected. And that has the same effect of conveniently swapping itself out for all of those trees. Not a bad deal. Now maybe you want to keep them both because you might want to swap back and forth. So I'm going to undo. Once again, select instances. And I did this a little bit ago. I'm going to copy those. And while I'm still here, I will replace selected. And then I'll go back up here and do a paste in place. Best of both worlds. Now I've still got my two-dimensional trees. And if I was really being smart, I could put these all in one component and turn it on and off with some creative layer or outliner management. But I'm going to undo because I just wanted to kind of show you a few ways without getting too detailed. The evergreen tree, I won't do those because the convention is the same. All right, almost done. How do we get these to land on this topography? And because this was about as much topography as I could find in Fargo, North Dakota, I'm going to exaggerate that with the scale tool. I have it selected. And we'll do a scale of 3. So I'll just start and I'll type 3, enter. That'll give me a little bit more topography. And actually it's not totally uncommon to see topography exaggerated by no more than a factor of 3 for presentation effect. I wouldn't want to create a grading plan from that because that would be dishonest. But in this situation, it is fine. Now, I'm going to erase that site boundary because I don't need that anymore. And I will select all of my trees. The neat thing about this is I could do this now, or I could do it later after I've swapped out all of my vegetation with 3D. And actually, it might have made more sense to do this part first because I would be moving less weight. But I'm moving these, making sure I'm in the blue direction. Click. And sometimes SketchUp needs to think. 2014 is a lot better than 2013, and hopefully 2016 will be even better. Maybe that is out when you're watching this. And I've got those moved up. I'm going to go back to a top-down view. That still looks correct. Make sure you are in parallel projection. If you're in perspective, it might not look correct, even though it is. All right, what do we want to do next? Well, we want to apply that drop tool that we installed. That was that .rbz. What's important is, let me edit one of these guys. Look where my component axis is. If you don't see that, that's a problem. You want to make sure that your component or your axes are visible. The other thing you might want to check is, I believe under model info and components, you have the option here to show component axes. And I think that will stay on all the time. There we go. So now even though I'm not editing these components, I can see that little axes there. And let's go over here. Let's take a look at these guys. That is good. Notice that the component axis is in the center. When you apply the drop plugin, it will drop that down until it hits a geometry. And just to illustrate this a little bit more, let me draw a little shape up here. Because you want your model to be kind of clean. Let's go to a top-down view here. Okay, watch what happens. A few of these trees are going to be intercepted by this shape, this geometry that I just drew. They should be. I'm kind of experimenting here. And I'm going to turn off that component axis. That's too much color. All right, so now I will come here, select these trees, right-click, and this particular tool happens to live underneath the right-click option. You really need to read the instructions before you even download any plugin because they get kind of scattered all over the place. But this one is underneath right-click, DropCG. Watch what happens. Boom, there they go. These ones landed here. If that ever happens, you can right-click again, and they should go to the next one down that they intercept. Now, let me undo because I want to show you kind of another sort of helpful thing. Let me edit one of these, and I'm going to select all with a shortcut, grab the move tool, and I'm going to intentionally move it down just a tiny bit. I'll do 0.5 feet. And what happened was I made sure that the axes, or the component axes, is a little bit higher than the extent of the geometry. Now the reason for that is to make sure none of your trees end up floating when you are doing this little trick. So once again, select my trees, right click, DropCG. And oh, that didn't work like I was expecting. So apparently I did something wrong and it does not like it because they're just kind of inching down. Well, that's what I get for kind of freestyling it. So let me undo it a few times here. I think I undid enough. Right click, drop. There we go. So I guess that's what I get for trying to freestyle my presentation, but a couple undos fixed it. Let's get rid of that. There you go. Got myself a nice little model here. I can turn on some shadows. Incidentally, if you do have SketchUp 2014, the shadows are much nicer. You can whip around your models and have your styles turned on and your shadows turned on much more conveniently than with 2013. So go ahead and get it if you don't already. There you go. Any questions? Find my email, track me down, ask me. I'll be happy to answer.